Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be diving deep into polygenic risk scores, which, some people might have heard about these scores.
Yeah.
They can help predict your chances of developing certain diseases,
Right.
like heart disease or breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll also find out that there are some important things to keep in mind when you're looking at them.
Absolutely.
And you have to look at these scores very carefully.
Yes.
So our main source for this deep dive is going to be an article from Knowable magazine.
Okay.
And the article is titled, Genes and Heart Disease, Finally Making the Link.
Interesting.
And I think that's really interesting because it's been over 20 years since we mapped the entire human genome.
It has, yeah.
But we're only now starting to understand how to use all this information to give us a better picture of our health risks.
It's really complex information, so it's not surprising. It's taken a while to tease it all apart.
Right. And so I've got an expert here with me today to help break it all down for us.
Happy to be here.
So welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. This is definitely a super exciting field with tons of potential, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm really excited to dive into it.
Great.
So maybe let's just jump right in.
Okay.
What exactly are these polygenic risk scores?
Okay.
And maybe you can tell us how they're different from the kind of genetics we might have learned about in school with Mendel and his peas.
Oh, yeah. Mendel and his peas. That brings me back.
Right.
So you probably remember how Mendel's peas had those single genes that would determine stuff like their color. One gene for green, one for yellow. Nice and simple.
Right.
And some diseases in humans work that way too, like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease. And these are caused by changes in a single gene, what we call mutations.
Okay, so one gene can really have a big impact.
Yeah, you get a change in one gene and that's it. That's the disease. But it turns out a lot of common conditions aren't that simple.
Okay.
So things like heart disease or cancers, even how tall we are.
Wow, really?
Yeah, all these things. They're influenced by thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of tiny variations in our DNA.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it's really complicated.
Yeah.
And each of these little variations has a tiny effect.
Oh.
Some increase your risk for a disease, some decrease it. Just a little bit.
So it's not just one gene, it's a whole bunch of them working together.
Exactly.
And each one sort of plays this small part in shaping our health.
That's a great way to put it. And a polygenic risk score.
Okay.
It's basically a way to add up the effects of all these tiny variations.
Okay.
So you get one score that shows your overall level of risk for that specific condition.
That's really interesting. How do scientists even begin to figure out all these tiny variations?
Right.
Seems like it'd be almost impossible.
It's definitely a massive undertaking. It's a huge amount of data.
Wow.
So they use these large studies called genome-wide association studies,
Okay.
or GWAS for short. And in these studies, they analyze the genomes of thousands, sometimes even millions of people, and they compare those genomes to their medical histories. So by looking for patterns, they can identify which genetic variations tend to show up more often in people with certain diseases.
So basically they're looking for connections.
Yes.
Or correlations between a variation and a disease.
That's right. But here's the thing.
Okay.
Just because there's a correlation, it doesn't necessarily mean that variation actually causes the disease.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
kind of like a clue.
Okay.
It might be a marker that's located near the actual gene that's causing the problem.
So it's a starting point.
Yeah, exactly. But for these risk scores, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that these markers, they give us information about how likely someone is to get a particular disease.
So it's like seeing smoke. It doesn't necessarily mean there's a fire,
Right.
but it makes you think, maybe there is.
Exactly. You become aware of the possibility.
That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
So these polygenic risk scores, it sounds like they could give us a glimpse into our future health.
They could.
But how accurate and reliable are they really?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's what everyone wants to know.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the potential,
Sure.
but also the challenges of these scores.
Yeah.
What are some things we should be aware of?
Well, first of all, it's really important to understand that even if you have a high polygenic risk score, it doesn't mean you're definitely going to get that disease. It just means your risk is higher
Okay.
compared to someone with a lower score.
So it's not like a guarantee.
No, not at all. Your lifestyle choices, those still play a huge role.
That makes sense.
Think of it more like a nudge in a certain direction, not like a hard push.
Okay.
If you know you're genetically predisposed to something like heart disease,
Right.
you might be extra motivated to take care of yourself, Eat healthy, exercise.
Yeah, make good choices.
Exactly.
So it's all about understanding the risks
Yeah.
and then taking steps to try to lower them.
I like that. Take control, be proactive.
Right. But here's where I think things get a little more tricky.
Yep.
You can actually get polygenic risk scores directly from some companies like 23andMe.
That's right.
So I can just send in my saliva sample
Yep.
and find out my risk for all sorts of things.
In theory, yes.
But there's got to be a catch.
Well, the catch is that we don't always know how these companies are calculating their scores. They often use these proprietary algorithms, so it's kind of a black box. We don't know all the factors they're considering.
So there's not a lot of transparency.
Yeah, not always. And that's why it's really important to have clear guidelines for these companies. And doctors need to be trained on how to explain these scores to their patients.
Right. So they can help people make sense of it all?
Exactly, because there's a real risk of misunderstanding.
Oh, I bet.
Like, the article mentions this study at Massachusetts General Hospital.
Okay.
And a lot of the patients in that study totally misinterpreted their scores.
In what way?
They confuse their percentile rank with their absolute risk.
Oh, interesting. Can you explain the difference between those two?
Sure. So your percentile rank basically tells you where you stand compared to other people.
Okay.
So like if you're in the 80th percentile,
Right.
that means your risk is higher than 80% of the population.
Got it.
But it doesn't tell you your actual chance of getting the disease.
Right.
For that, you have to look at the average risk for that condition in the general population.
So context is really important here.
It is. For example, thyroid cancer. It's actually pretty rare.
Okay.
So even if your polygenic risk score doubles or triples your risk, your absolute risk might still be pretty low.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I can see how it'd be easy to get those numbers mixed up.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing to keep in mind,
Okay.
there's a cost to all this testing.
Right. Okay.
You know, you've got the genome sequencing, the analysis, the expert interpretation.
Yeah.
You got to store all that data somewhere.
That all adds up.
It does. And insurance coverage for this kind of testing is still kind of iffy.
I can imagine.
So if these scores are going to be used more widely, insurance companies, they're going to want to see some proof that they actually help people and they're worth the cost.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So are there any areas right now where these scores are proving to be the most useful?
Well, cardiovascular disease is probably the furthest along.
Okay.
There was this huge study from the UK Biobank. They followed like 500,000 people,
Wow.
and they found that those polygenic risk scores were really good at predicting who would develop heart disease or have a stroke.
That's amazing.
And get this, they actually did a simulation in the study.
Okay.
And it showed that if they used polygenic risk scores along with the standard risk assessments, they could potentially prevent 7% more heart attacks.
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah, it's a significant impact. So it seems like these scores could be a really powerful tool in preventing heart disease.
Yeah.
But there's a big problem that the article brings up.
Okay.
The data that's used to develop these scores, it's not very diverse.
Oh, right. The diversity problem.
Yeah. Most of the people in those big GW studies, they've been of European ancestry.
Okay.
So that creates a problem when we try to apply these scores to people from other backgrounds.
Right, because our genes might be different.
Exactly. So a score that's based on data from Europeans, it might not be accurate for someone who's African or Asian.
So it's almost like we're building a system with a blind spot.
It is. And this bias could actually make existing health disparities even worse.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
So what can we do to address this lack of diversity?
Well, the good news is that people are starting to recognize this problem.
That's good.
And there are several initiatives to increase diversity in these genetic studies.
Oh, good.
Like there's H3 Africa, which is focused on African populations. And then there's the All of Us research program here in the U.S.
Right.
And that one's aiming to collect data from 1 million diverse individuals.
Wow.
So the more complete and diverse the data is, the more accurate these scores will be for everyone.
So it's not just about fairness.
Yeah.
It's about making these scores scientifically accurate for everyone.
Absolutely. That's the goal. But even with better data, we still have to figure out how to interpret these scores and translate them into practical health advice.
Right. It's one thing to know your risk.
Exactly.
But it's another to know what to do about it.
Right. So the question is...
where do we go from here?
Yeah. Where do we go from here?
What does the future hold for these polygenic risk scores?
Lots of possibilities.
What are you excited about?
Well, I think the future of polygenic risk scores is incredibly exciting. I mean, this field is evolving so rapidly. You know, I can really imagine a future where we can give people personalized health recommendations.
Wow.
based on their own unique DNA.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. It'd be like empowering them to kind of take control of their health destiny.
That's quite a vision.
Yeah.
But we're not quite there yet, are we? What are some of the hurdles that we still have to overcome?
I think one of the biggest challenges is figuring out what to do with this information. Going beyond just identifying the risk
Right.
and actually developing effective interventions.
Right. So, for example, if someone has a high polygenic risk score for heart disease,
Exactly.
what can they actually do about it?
Right. Like, what are the specific lifestyle changes or medical treatments
Right.
that would be most beneficial for that person? That's really where a lot of the research is focused right now.
So it's about going from prediction to prevention.
Exactly.
It's not just saying, here's your risk. It's like, okay, here's what you can do about it.
Exactly.
So what would you say is the most important thing for listeners to keep in mind if they're maybe thinking about getting one of these polygenic risk scores?
I think it's really important to remember that these scores are just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
They don't tell the whole story. I
Uh-huh.
mean, they give you valuable information about your genes and your predispositions.
Yeah.
But they don't factor in all the other things that can influence your health.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, your family history,
Okay.
your lifestyle choices,
Right.
environmental exposures, all that stuff.
So it's not like a crystal ball.
Right. It's not a
It's
crystal.
more like a roadmap, I guess.
I like that.
A roadmap.
It can guide you, but it doesn't dictate exactly where you're going to end up.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's all about empowering people to make informed decisions,
Right.
not about making decisions for them.
I'm also kind of curious about the ethical side of all this.
Yeah.
Are there any potential downsides or risks
Sure.
that we should be thinking about with these scores?
Yeah, definitely. I think one concern is the potential for discrimination.
Oh, how so?
What if insurance companies
Oh,
or
right.
employers got access to this information?
They could use it against people?
They could, deny coverage or job opportunities.
That's a scary thought.
Yeah. So we really need to make sure that this information is protected
Right.
and that it's used responsibly and ethically.
Absolutely. And I guess there's also the psychological impact to consider, right?
Absolutely. Like, some people might find it really empowering to know this information about their genes.
Right. Some people will.
But others might get really anxious about it.
Definitely. Some people might feel like, oh, well, if it's in my genes, then there's nothing I can do about it.
Right. It's like this feeling of fatalism,
Exactly.
that it's predetermined.
Right. So I think it's really important to have genetic counseling available and support systems.
To help people understand what it all means.
Exactly.
It's not just about giving people data.
Right.
It's about making sure that they can handle it.
Absolutely. It's about empowering them to use that data.
Right.
To make good decisions for their health.
This has been a super fascinating discussion.
It has.
I feel like we've only scratched the surface
We have
of this whole topic.
so much more to explore.
There really is. But before we wrap things up,
Sure.
I'd love to get your final takeaway for our listeners.
Okay.
If someone's interested in learning more about these scores, or maybe they're even thinking about getting tested themselves,
Yeah.
what advice would you give them?
I would say definitely do your research first.
Okay.
Talk to your doctor. Make sure you understand the benefits and the limitations of these scores.
Right.
And, get your information from reliable sources.
Right. Trustworthy websites, medical professionals.
Exactly. There are also some great resources available online.
Oh, cool.
You can check out the National Institutes of Health. They have a lot of good information.
Those are great recommendations. So it's all about being informed
Yes.
and proactive about your health.
I like that.
I think that's a great place to end it.
Yeah, I think so too.
It really is amazing to think about how far we've come with genetics.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how much this knowledge is already starting to make a difference in people's lives.
Absolutely.
It feels like we're just at the beginning of something really big.
I agree.
I think in the next few years, we're going to see even more incredible discoveries and applications.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be in this field.
Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been a really insightful deep dive. I feel like I've learned a ton about polygenic risk scores.
Glad to hear it.
And for all our listeners out there, if you're interested in exploring this topic further, we'll have some links and resources in the show notes.
Great.
So be sure to check those out. And we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.